Welcome back. We'll start with Iraq, where 7 more protesters have been shot dead and 80 others wounded during clashes with security forces near Baghdad's Tahrir Square. Now, this brings the death toll to over 280 since the protest against corruption and unemployment began last month. Medics say 3 demonstrators died from bullet wounds and a 4th was killed when a tear gas canister pierced his skull. 3 more protesters were killed and dozens other wounded in southern Basra city. Police said security forces cleared protest sites in Baghdad and Basra. Prime Minister Abdul Mahdi has called for demonstrators to allow the country to return to normalcy. In a statement, Mahdi said he will announce electoral reforms in the coming days. Five Syrian government soldiers have been killed by Turkish-led troops after intense clashes broke out in northeast Syria. The state media also said that 26 others were injured in the fighting. Moreover, the Syrian army has taken control of the Umesheva village in Ras Al Ain area. Earlier, President Tayyip Erdogan said Turkey will not leave Syria until other countries pull out. Erdogan said Ankara will continue its battle against Kurdish fighters until all of them have left the region. Israeli forces have wounded 71 Palestinians during a protest against illegal settlements at the Gaza border. Medics say the victims sustained bullet wounds and tear gas burns. Over 6,000 Palestinians on the Gaza Strip participated in the protest. Since March 2018, Palestinians have been holding weekly March of Return protests on the border. Meanwhile, Israeli occupation forces arrested 2 Palestinian youths. According to Palestine's Prisoners Society, nearly 6,000 Palestinians, including women and children, are languishing in Israeli jails. President Hassan Rouhani says Iran has discovered a new oil field with estimated reserves of 53 billion barrels. Speaking at an event in Yazd city, he said Tehran has disappointed enemies with its economic growth despite sanctions. Iran's non-oil exports are on the rise in the face of unilateral and illegal curbs by the U.S. Furthermore, Iran says Russia and China are the only countries keeping it from abandoning the 2015 nuclear deal. Speaking in Moscow, Deputy Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said Tehran is considering quitting the JCPOA in the coming months. Araghchi said if the U.S. sanctions are not lifted and EU leaders fail to circumvent the curbs, Iran will have no choice. He said the steps Iran has taken so far by reducing commitments are in accordance with the provisions of the deal. The diplomat said Tehran is still implementing the deal despite being under U.S. economic terrorism. Now, Kabul says it has killed the Taliban commander responsible for the death of 3 Afghan judges in an ambush on Thursday. The Defense Ministry said Waizuddin was killed in an airstrike by Afghan forces in central Logar province without providing further details. In a series of tweets, the ministry claimed killing 25 Taliban in an airstrikes across Afghanistan. The ministry also said that it has destroyed and captured weapon caches of the Taliban during these operations. The Taliban have neither confirmed nor refuted the information. Afghanistan's chief executive, Abdullah Abdullah, has boycotted the recount of presidential polls. In a statement, his party, the National Coalition of Afghanistan, asked its observers to avoid the process across the country. The party said it is pointless to start recounting without sorting out the fraudulent votes first. It alleged there are 300,000 fraudulent votes that will not be accepted under any circumstances. This comes after the Independent Election Commission asked all observers to attend vote recounting as early as possible. The result of presidential polls was set to be announced on October 19th, but has been further delayed. To snub dissent against court verdict on Babri Mosque Ayodhya case, New Delhi has imposed occupied Kashmir-like restrictions in Muslim-majority cities of India. Indian Supreme Court yesterday had disputed land of Babri Mosque to Hindus in a highly controversial verdict. The Indian government has deployed additional 5,000 troops in Ayodhya, 15,000 in Bengaluru and thousands in other cities. The government has shut down the internet in Jaipur to curb the dissent voices in the country. The authorities have also ordered to keep all the educational institutions closed in many cities. All India Muslim Personal Law Board has rejected the verdict, announcing that it will file a review petition. Top U.S. newspaper, The New York Times, has published an op-art series of animations exposing Indian atrocities in occupied Kashmir. It depicts the trauma of a Kashmiri experiencing New Delhi's clampdown in the valley since August 5th. The caricatures explain the sentiment of Kashmiris when India revoked the valley's special status, cutting it from the world. They depict the horrors of Indian military raids on Kashmiri houses, ransacking homes and abducting young boys without reason. They tell how many youngsters ran and hid in the fields to avoid arrest and torture. The caricatures show how Indian forces torture young boys by hanging them upside down, flogging and electrocuting them. The sketches describe how women felt faint after being cut from their families. They also tell the story of a marriage under curfew with no celebration and amid protests. Ankara is observing the 81st death anniversary of Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, the founder of the Republic of Turkey. President Tayyip Erdogan attended the ceremony at Anıt Kabir, the mausoleum of Atatürk, in the capital Ankara. Speaking at the occasion, Erdogan said Atatürk was the commander-in-chief of the War of Independence. He paid rich tribute to the first president and said he will remain a symbol of esteemed honor. Atatürk died on the 10th of November 1938 at his official residence in Istanbul. South Korea says the U.S. is very actively trying to persuade North Korea to resume denuclearization talks. The statement came after Pyongyang threatened to abandon the denuclearization process, accusing the U.S. of non-serious behavior. National Security Advisor Chung Yu-yong said Seoul is taking Pyongyang's December deadline very seriously. Earlier, North Korea said the window of opportunity for progress in dialogue with the United States is getting smaller. North's Foreign Ministry's representative Jo Choi-soo said sanctions on Pyongyang are an unacceptable insult. In April, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un gave the U.S. a year-end deadline to show more flexibility and warned not to ignore that date. The U.S. will host NATO chiefs next week to review Washington's agenda of upping defense and spending and equitable burden sharing. Despite growing tensions between the U.S. and NATO, President Trump has been pressing NATO to pay more for their defense. The White House says President Trump will meet NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg on November 14th. The meeting comes ahead of a NATO summit in London on December 3rd and 4th. Stoltenberg will also meet U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and members of Congress. Earlier this week, French President Emmanuel Macron warned NATO of Washington's lack of predictability under Trump. German Chancellor Angela Merkel rejected the view, calling NATO indispensable. Five police officers have been killed in an ambush near Oaxaca state in southern Mexico. Authorities say two others have been injured in the attack during a regular patrol. In a tweet, Oaxaca Governor Alejandro Murat condemned the incident and ordered an investigation. The drug violence has multiplied in recent years in Oaxaca. Earlier, the mayor of San Jose, Estancia Grande, and a state official were killed in an armed attack. In Bolivia, police have joined the anti-government protests in 3 cities and marched with demonstrators in the capital, La Paz. Security forces have started withdrawing support for President Evo Morales after a disputed election triggered riots. The defense minister ruled out a military operation against the rebellious police. In a tweet, President Morales termed the police revolt as a coup. Bolivia has been rocked by deadly violence over opposition claims that Morales rigged his re-election last month. Meanwhile, Spain is voting in its fourth general election in as many years to break the political deadlock after a fractured coalition. Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez announced fresh polls in September after failing to form a government. Sanchez's Socialist and Pablo Casado's People's Party are the parties poised to take first two positions in today's election. Opinion polls show the Socialists are leading, but likely to win slightly fewer seats than in April. It shows the People's Party will be stronger and far-right party Vox can become Spain's third largest party. Meanwhile, Catalan separatists are protesting and calling for freedom of 9 jailed leaders on election eve. The government has sent additional security forces to the region to make sure today's election is not disrupted. And we take a quick short break. We'll be back with more news in detail. Welcome back. Now we'll be talking about Romania, which is set to choose its new president today in a highly contested election. This year's election has been overshadowed by a political crisis that saw a minority government installed just days ago. Opinion polls show incumbent centre-right President Klaus Iohannis ahead with around 40% of the votes. It shows the centre-left candidate and former Prime Minister Viorica Dăncilă at second position with 22%. Now, Dăncilă's Social Democrat government was forced to step down after losing a no-confidence vote last month. If no candidate wins more than 50% of votes today, there will be a second round of voting on November 24th. In Japan, thousands of people attended a national festival to celebrate the enthronement of Emperor Naruhito in Tokyo. Some 10,000 citizens and 20,000 invited guests attended the festival. The festival came after Naruhito completed his accession to the throne on 22nd of October. Emperor Naruhito and Empress Masako also took part in a royal parade around central Tokyo. The formal enthronement was postponed to 10th of November due to Typhoon Hagibis. The emperor acceded to the throne in May this year after his father Akihito became the first monarch to abdicate in 2 centuries. Congo's military says it has killed 25 ISIS militants over the past 10 days in the country's eastern regions. Operation in charge General Jacques Nduru said 7 soldiers have also died since the campaign began on October 30th. Nduru said the army has seized 4 ISIS positions around the eastern city of Beni in North Kivu province. The ADF group linked with ISIS has been operating along the Congo-Uganda border for more than 2 decades. Congo is also battling a recent outbreak of Ebola. Regular militant attacks have hampered efforts to contain Ebola across the area. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, 37,000 people of Zongo City are stranded in floods. Authorities say more than 5,000 homes have been affected. They say heavy rains flooded the Ubangi River in northeastern DR Congo, which caused the disaster. Government says thousands of children are among those trapped in floodwater without potable water, medicine and food. Rain-triggered disasters have killed and displaced hundreds across the East African region this year. And more on natural disasters. 6 people have died after cyclone Bulbul hit between Sagar Islands of Indian West Bengal and Khepupura region in Bangladesh. The authorities said over 2 million people have been evacuated from coastal towns of both countries. The authorities said 1 person was killed by an uprooted tree in Kolkata and another by a collapsed wall in Odisha state of India. In India, 60,000 were evacuated while over 2 million moved to more than 5,500 cyclone shelters. Dhaka Meteorological Department said the cyclone is weakening with 150 km/h winds. NASA has unveiled its first all-electric experimental aircraft in the California desert. Adapted from Italian-made NASA has unveiled its first all-electric experimental aircraft in the California desert. Adapted from Italian-made model, the X-57 Maxwell has been under development since 2015 and will take a year to test its first flight. Details in this report.
After attaching 2 of the 14 electric motors powered by specially designed batteries, NASA deemed that Maxwell is ready for its first public preview. This is the latest aircraft the National Aeronautics and Space Administration has developed over many decades. A newly built simulator allows engineers and pilots to get the feel of the finished version of the X-57.
It's very exciting for us. So I know for me and Tim Williams, the other pilot's going to be flying it. For Armstrong to be getting back into the crewed X-plane work is very exciting for us.
NASA X-57 venture includes standards for airworthiness, safety, as well as for energy efficiency and noise.
So there's a number of interesting new markets for electric airplanes. The first one's called urban air mobility, and there's many companies trying to get into this area. So if you think of like an air taxi, imagine a taxi, but in 3D, a vehicle that can lift off the ground and take you around a big city, say 20 to 50 to 100 miles.
One challenge is improving battery technology to store more energy. Due to limitations, the aircraft is envisioned for use in short-haul flights as a commuter plane.
Now bringing you an update from the world of business. U.S. President Donald Trump says trade talks with China are moving along very nicely. Trump said the United States will only make a deal with Beijing if it is the right deal for America. But speaking at Joint Base Andrews, Trump said the talks have moved more slowly than he expects. President Trump added that China's supply chain is all broken like an egg and Beijing is desperate to make a deal. The U.S. president said there have been incorrect reporting about his willingness to lift tariffs. He said reports regarding the level and amount of tariffs lifted are incorrect. Credit rating agency Moody's has warned it might cut its rating on Britain's sovereign debt again due to high borrowing levels and Brexit paralysis. In a toughly worded statement, Moody's said the Brexit's effects on Britain's socio-political outlook will be long-lasting. It said Britain's nearly £2 trillion of public debt, which is 80% of annual economic output, risks rising again. Both of the main political parties have promised big spending increases ahead of next month's election. Moody's stripped the country of its AAA rating in 2013 and downgraded it again in 2017. And now let's take a look at how the weather is faring around the world. And that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News.